Wow, this is the first recording of 2022 and we're in almost mid-April. Spring is finally here. This is probably the second really gorgeous day that we've had this year. And as every new year comes around, new projects always come up too. And this year, one of my projects is to install a bed area specifically for an asparagus patch. And I'm just going to showcase my progress of how I'm going to go about doing that. After having seen so many people's ways of growing asparagus, I feel like I've got a pretty well-rounded idea of how to do this from start to finish, and I'm just going to showcase the way that I'm going to go about it. So this area here is going to be where I'm going to be putting the asparagus. It's about 3.5 feet across and roughly 8.5 feet going this way. And I kind of did an elongated pentagonal shape. Quite a while back, I had acquired these garden divider pieces. They're 2 feet across, and this sort of project that I never ended up doing. So I had a bunch of them lying around, and they made a perfect enclosure for this bed here. It's pretty tall, which means I can really pile in a lot of soil material here for those asparagus roots to grow into over the decades that they'll be here. But because this is a mesh, I also bought some vinyl pieces that I insulated the inside with. This way, no soil will pour out outside of the bed area. And because the price of wood has literally almost tripled since I first started buying lumber for garden projects over these last couple of years, I'm finding vinyl to be not a bad choice for creating a barrier for a raised bed. These aren't very long pieces. They're only like 8 inches each, so by having two, I can cut them to size and stack them together and make a rather tall area. So the only hard part about it is using a handsaw to cut it properly aligned. It takes a little bit of time, but with a bit of patience, I got that done, and I was able to create a section cut to size for each of the walls in this pentagon. The next major thing is, because this was originally lawn underneath, I put in some cardboard, and above that I've just started putting in basically scrap material that I've cut from the stuff that's overwintered in the garden, and that's going to form just this initial layer. But I'm also going to be adding small logs basically to create a Hugelkultur style bed, and that'll be the next thing that goes on here. So this is a collection of fallen and decaying trunks and branches I gathered from the woods. The varied thickness or diameter of the wood pieces make it ideal for this project. To taper down the dried plant material thrown into the bed from my garden cleanup, I laid out an even layer of the thinner tree branches. And to fill in all those air pockets, I used some old ProMix peat moss mixture that I had laying around. I also had tons of bags of cheap topsoil on hand, more than I knew what to do with, so I threw in some of that along with the peat. On this nice even mat, I then laid down a layer of the thickest trunks I had available. Now normally, this would be the first thing to go down on the top of the cardboard, but in my case, I simply wasn't able to acquire the bigger wood trunks until well after I had already tossed old plant material into the base of the garden bed. Next, I emptied out my compost bin of its unfinished organic matter that I accumulated over the wintertime and laid it all out above the wood logs, making sure to fill in all the air gaps. Unfinished compost is totally okay here because all the excess nitrogen material marries so well with the high carbon material of the logs beneath it, so the two will help break each other down nicely. Here is a collection of fallen and dried up leaves, which I always make sure to collect a lot of before winter sets in. Sandwiching some of this now dried and flaky leaf material between the compost below and the layer of sod above is an ideal buffer for all this green and nitrogen-rich material. The sod I removed from an area I was excavating for another project, so if you start any projects involving the removal of grass, you can save it for building a Hugelkultur bed. I find that a drain spade type shovel works great for uplifting grass, and after I gathered what I needed, I laid down the sod as a single layer in the asparagus bed with the grass facing down and the soil facing up. This ensures that the grass gets completely smothered. Continuing this lasagna building process, I added more bulk in the form of ProMix high porosity peat moss mix that I still had left over. I smoothed out the top and opted to lay down a layer of newspaper as some added insurance that the grass would stay smothered and not grow back up. The remaining top level of the garden bed would constitute a mixture of the most affordable substrates that I could get my hands on. This included the basic topsoil I already had a lot of, and composted shrimp with peat moss. Note that these bagged products commonly found in garden centers should be ran through a mesh screen first to filter out bits of trash or plastic that somehow invariably end up in the final product that we buy at the stores. I also include sand, not only for balancing the soil structure and adding porosity. I also read many accounts of people stating that its mineral structure enables better transference of energy to the plants. So I sprinkled each material on top of the bed, evenly distributed, and then I moved on to some final amendments. First up was sprinkling a modest amount of glacial rock dust all over the bed to ensure that any minerals the plants would need are going to be present. And because I've had a bag of bone and blood meal laying around that's seldomly used, I tossed in a few handfuls of it also. Now with this entire cocktail neatly piled on, it was time to use a spading fork to mix it all up, being careful to work just the area above the layer of newspaper. As you can see with the finished result, everything looks nice and well incorporated. Now this here isn't specific to the asparagus patch, but I thought I would just showcase a little bit of something that's commonly done with areas that you want to cover and protect and bring fertility to, which is laying down of cardboard over existing grass or whatever the terrain is, just to prevent any weeds and things from coming up. And I got cedar mulch. Basically I'm using what's most readily available near me to cover the area with a really nice thick area, at least probably 8 to 10 inches. I'm going pretty deep here because I want this to take a long time to break down, as this is going to be a path essentially to support the stone pavers that I'm going to be putting to walk on top of this mulch. Otherwise when it's wet it just sticks to your feet and gets everywhere. So that's what I'm doing with the surrounding area here by the asparagus bed. Now, I'm showing this image here to demonstrate the most basic and common conceptualization of how a hugelkultur mound or bed would be set up, which differs a bit from how I stacked my asparagus bed, but just consider that a permission slip that you can tweak universal recipes to your liking. Note that you can dig into the ground first to create a hollow that'll minimize the height you need to build up for your bed. That's a lot of work, so I didn't do this. Typically, your first layer will then be the largest sized logs, which will take the longest time to break down, with layers of logs stacked above that, incrementally decreasing in diameter or size. Lighter materials that take less time to fully decompose will follow, including any combination of straw, small branches and twigs, or as I primarily used, unfinished compost and inverted sod. Light materials can top that, such as well-shredded leaves and dried grass clippings. Then the most readily fertile layer will be on top, composed of your topsoil and finished compost. Finishing with a layer of mulch will help to lock in the moisture and protect the most fertile soil layer from erosion and sun scorching. My current mulch preference is using about ½ an inch of dried shredded leaves I collect in autumn, but in the past I have also used fine wood chips or coconut coir chunks. I just prefer mulching material that will readily break down, which can then incorporate into the topsoil come springtime, and I just reapply new leaf mulch as needed. Wood chips and other chunkier materials require that you remove it out of the way for planting out seedlings, and I just find that nuance kind of annoying. With the asparagus bed finished, that completes part 1 of this video. Now stay tuned for part 2, where I'll prepare the asparagus crowns, get them into the ground, and we'll follow along as they grow through the season. Thanks for watching.